This is a huge moment for the history of mankind. Here we have England on 99.94. I'm Jarrod Kimber. I won't be on this podcast, so that's okay. You won't have to get used to me. But for today, I'm going to be interviewing the great man Rory Dollard and his sidekick Dan Norcross, as they're known publicly. These two men have never been, forged together, but I'm sure they've probably had the odd late night argument about politics. In fact, I'm positive they have because I've spent time with both of them. And even if they've only ever had one conversation, it's probably an argument about politics. But what we're going to do on this podcast is make them argue about cricket. And that's why I've brought them together. The professional posh, the professional posh boy and the professional northern cricket grumbler. Is Rory Dollard and Dan Norcross. Is that the kind of intro you're looking for, Dan? I know you prefer to do the intros, not hear them.
Yeah, it was pretty good. Pretty good. I'll give that 7 out of 10. Yeah. I mean,
it was efficient. It was efficient in offending us both in the space of 10 seconds.
I don't think it's... Well, I definitely offended you, Rory. Let's go to Dan first. Dan, you basically are a posh English person who grifted his way into cricket. And I say that as someone who also grifted my way into cricket. So I say it with admiration, whereas other people may not see it that way.
Yeah, I mean, I'm unoffendable, which is usually the case if you're slightly posh, because you need to be, because you're largely offensive to the outside world. I mean, posh, yes, I went to an expensive school and I went to what is now an expensive university, but when I went to it, it was entirely free, because one thing that Rory and I would probably agree on politically is that the world's gone to hell in a handcart, and everything should be free. Yes, I grifted my way into it. I guess so. I started Test Match Sofa in 2009 when I found the business of earning money from the city so soul-destroyingly miserable that I would rather be broke than ever again put on a suit and tie and walk into an office and look at a spreadsheet and talk about supply sides. And I can't even remember what even that meant, and going forwards and projections and sensitivity analyses. So, yes, I rejected all that, set up a pirate commentary service, which is a little bit like what Adam Collins did later with White Line Wire and Jeff Lemon and those guys. And we commentated on England matches initially, home and away. And then we realised, I think a lot earlier than the ECB, that the direction of travel was moving towards India. So we covered all their games as well, because that way you get more people listening. And also, their cricket tended to be a bit more fun. And after 3 or 4 years of that, it got bought by a magazine called The Cricketer in England. And subsequent to that, I left in 2014 to... I say you don't join the BBC, you get to be a freelancer, and then they give you a bit of work. And so I ended up on a Test Match Special, which not all of our listeners will be familiar with, but it's basically the way in which English people mostly consume international cricket on the radio in England when they're not listening to TalkSport, which you're on. And I suppose, I did my first men's Test match in 2016, my first women's Test match in 2014, and I've mostly covered the England team and all of their opponents for the last 6 years, and it's enormously good fun and extremely surreal, and I get to bump into Rory at every Test match that he's there, as he's fulminating with rage at how bad the food is at Headingley.
I mean, that's an obvious one. But your cricket background goes back a long way. Do you still play? I mean, you were playing. You and I have shared a partnership. Well, one of us scored runs, the other one was there. But you played for a very, very long time, and you're a huge Surrey fan. I mean, people are going to be shocked by that, but you're a huge Surrey fan as well. You've been travelling to the Oval for your entire lifetime.
Yeah, well, Surrey is the name given to the South London cricket team. It's a very deprived area of London, and I live in South London. So I went to watch Surrey from about 1976. I always captained things like the second 11 at school, because I was never quite good enough. But nobody else at school ever seemed to be remotely interested in the tactics or bowling changes or field placings, and indeed making telephone calls. So I ended up captaining various teams because that was the only way you could get an 11 out. And I continued to play regularly, like twice a weekend, up until I was about 40 odd. And then when Test Match Sofa started, you notice just how much international cricket is on at the weekends, which is no great surprise, but I'd forgotten about that while I was playing. So now when I play sort of silly charity games every now and then. But I'm 53 and the business of fielding is so tedious. I'm one of those people who really has embraced the T20 era because it's only an hour and 20 minutes until I can have a cigarette, which that's...
Don't you have a bat sponsor?
I do. Well, I do. Woodstock. Yeah. I've got actually, I've got all my kit right behind me here.
Money goes to money, Jarrod.
Yeah. I just say, of all the people to get a bat sponsor, you're the most likely. There are like kids out there now, like averaging 80 in their club league, who have to pay 500 quid for a bat, and you're just like, no, would you like to see my fancy bat that someone gave me?
They need to learn the hunger for the game, Jarrod. Things just don't come to you on a plate. You've got to put in hard graft. You've got to average 14.73 consistently in the Surrey Championship League Division 4 Second Division for 25 years before you get one of these bad boys, I tell
you. One thing I would like to say is you skipped over your school a little bit, but you went to the same school as Nigel Farage and Owen Morgan. And I think in many ways you're a combination of those two great men.
Yes, I actually did go to school with Nigel Farage. He was 6 years older than me, and that was an experience. He was a prefect at the time. It's also the school, I should point out, of Trevor Bailey, former England all-rounder, and A.E.R. Gilligan.
Chris Jordan?
Chris Jordan as well, but A.E.R. Gilligan's a slightly more interesting one because he was the secretary of the British Union of Fascists. So my school has had a long and illustrious history of producing people of dubious political leanings.
I'm already realizing with this podcast how much of it I will have to watch on YouTube just to watch Rory's face as you pull out facts like that as he handles them. Yeah, I mean, I was there on Test Match Sofa. I think I missed your first series. I came in when you started your second series. I did about the first year that you're at your house, and then moved on to Nigel's flat. I never once you went to the Cricketer, I disappeared by that point. For me, it was a place where a bunch of huge... It's very similar to what you see with the Tailenders podcast now, where the Tailenders podcast is one thing, and there is this huge sort of sub-environment of all these fans of the Tailenders podcast who've gone on to make their own podcast and everything else. Test Match Sofa was very similar to that. There were professionals around, Mark Steele and Andy Zoltzman and George Dobell, but there was a lot of more people like you and me, Dan, who were just kind of pretending that we were involved in cricket because we liked it. It was a very exciting time to be. How does one go from an organization that the BBC wants to shut down to being on the TMS, the proper TMS, the Test Match Special, the BBC version? Because I would love to know how you pulled that off.
Well, you've got to send an email first or get hold of a telephone number. Well, the way you pull it off, actually, is that Test Match Sofa had been going for... what was it, about 5 years? I think we've done 5 from 2009 to 2013 inclusive, so 5 sort of years of cricket. And we'd got better and better at doing it. And we had better and better people on. And we developed a sort of... It was the same style, but it had been honed to the point when we actually at last knew what we were doing. And because we also had... I say we... I tried to inculcate strict disciplines in my ball-by-ballers so that they would see the ball and call it. And some of them did do that. And I guess that meant that we actually had a viable product, that if you wanted not to hear cricket done in the same sort of way, then you could listen to Test Match Sofa and you would get to find out what was going on in the game. And I think TMS at that time was coming to terms with things like Twitter and Instagram, less so, but Facebook and all those kind of things that were happening. So they were listening in to what we were doing and how we were using it. To a degree, I think they saw me strangely as an asset for progressing the program editorially, just taking it a little bit more into the 21st century, And also, I've done so many hours of commentary. If you do 180 days, I think in 2012 we did 180 days of commentary. There was a time when I was commentating England, New Zealand at 9:30 at night in England, and then instantly moving on at the end of that day's play at about 4:30 in the morning, we picked up India versus Australia and continued round through till 11:30 in the morning because ABC weren't covering. India, Australia. And we sort of saw ourselves as not just an alternative space, but defenders of the human right to hear ball-by-ball radio commentary. And, when a country as vast as Australia wasn't able to keep up with the cricket and were forced, therefore, to listen to Test Match Sofa, which was really a bunch of partisan Englishmen and women shouting at Michael Clarke and being really happy when India won, there was a degree of immense satisfaction. I remember Senator Faulkner, who's a lawmaker in Australia, complaining in Parliament. He said, "It's bloody ridiculous. I've been listening to the ABC for the last 50 years, and now I've got to listen to a bunch of pissed-up Englishmen taking a mickey out of our boys. It's outrageous. And also, I don't know how to get them in the car." So I ended up sending him an email explaining how you can get Test Match Sofa, and he came back and said, "Thanks, Dan." So there was this kind of strange thing when I realised that we were slightly bigger than just us, as it had been, us playing around and trying to find a style and, drinking a bit too much in my sitting room, and it started to become genuinely serious. And then I just didn't want it to end, and the direction of travel for Test Match Sofa wasn't great. So I thought I'd just speculate, and then the producer of TMS, who'd listened to an awful lot of what we did, offered me a gig on a county game. But, I think the thing that I'm most excited, most proud of, I'm proud of what we all achieved, really, because you know this. When we were at the World Cup final at Lords in 2019, I think there were 7 people there who'd worked regularly on Test Match Sofa, who'd done their first kind of cricket gigs on Test Match Sofa, and they were either commentating for the BBC, writing for the Times, commentating for the Asian Network, sorting out the Channel 2 broadcast, the world feed. It was extraordinary. So it was a kind of nursery for developing lots of people who've then gone off and worked in cricket professionally ever since. And, now it's my living, which is weird.
My favorite of all my commentary, I did about a year and a half probably. And my favorite was when we did the England-Bangladesh series, which I think started at 3 a.m. And it was you, me, and Manny turning up at your flat at 2:30 in the morning and working. And there was no reinforcements till about 8:30 in the morning. And I think it was Gary Naylor came in one morning, and we literally just all left him on the microphone on his own because we couldn't do it anymore. It was an incredible time. You've also recently started doing a new podcast, Zero Ducks Given, which sounds like it's got a great podcast name. Take us through that.
Well, I was approached by Toby Tarrant, who's the son of Chris Tarrant, who's a famous media personality in England, and he was trying to find an irreverent, kind of swearier version of Tailenders, but without that sort of comforting feel that people, you don't want to tune into every podcast and hear that people get on with each other. Occasionally, you want people who are just going to be rancorous and argue. So he came to me. I said, "Yeah, I can fulfil that role." But he said, "We need a cricketer." And I don't know why, but Stephen Finn came straight to my mind because he's a wonderfully lugubrious guy who does actually have a really lovely turn of phrase. And he was just making his way in broadcasting. And I've worked with him a bit on Test Match Special, and I wanted to develop a rapport with him. And effectively, the basis of the podcast is you've got the fan, who's Toby, you've got the player, who's Finney, and you have notionally the journalist, because broadcasters sort of have to be journalistic. You have to step back from the action, I think. I mean, I say that. There are many commentators who are employed by boards who don't ever step away from the action and very much reflect the views of that board. But that's not the way we're sort of taught how to do it on TMS. So you kind of, I act as a sort of break on Toby's lunacy and a reminder to Stephen Finn that he's still a privileged man because he gets to play cricket. So stop whining about having to bowl 20 overs in a day. It is your job. And that's kind of what the podcast is. It happens once a week. Although this week we did a best of because everybody was in different parts of the world. But yeah, so we take the topics of the day and tear them apart. And if you're really unlucky, you can get to hear a graphic blow-by-blow account of a pimple that I burst in 1994.
Looking forward to that. I'm a big fan of this new podcast we put together here on 99.94 because the minute you said there that, the idea of a podcast is to argue with people, Rory got excited because that is obviously Rory's main. I always say main skill, but I almost say your main hobby, Rory. At a certain point,
yeah,
you know,
I'd be
I don't
disappointed to
think
make
I've
it.
ever seen you in a corner of a pub just having a, you know, you're always arguing about something, whether it's, you know, Bob Dylan versus Springsteen,
Easy.
or whether it's politics, or whether it's anything to do with Liam Plunkett.
Yeah, I mean, these are all things. These are all things with easy,
You
correct
know,
answers. I can settle them all for you now if you want. Springsteen, red, not blue, and Plunkett, yes.
Vote Plunkett is what I'm hearing here with a soundtrack by Bruce. You played cricket a lot when you were growing up. In fact, if my sources are correct, you recently made your first ever 100. Probably about, what, 15, 17 years past your prime, and somehow you made 100.
You have deliberately dropped me in this to be clear, because I asked you not to mention that, because the lads I play with now,
yes,
the lads I currently play with, so when you're going to talk about that on your podcast? Now, I didn't have a podcast for most of the time they've been saying this. You know, every time I do a misfield, which is more regular than I would like, put that in your bloody podcast. You know, I don't even have one. They just grossly misunderstood what my professional life was. Now it's seemingly I do, and I was not going to give them the satisfaction of talking about my superb 123, because you know, it's getting on towards
123.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for
that's annoying.
That, yeah.
That's annoying. I've
Well,
got 200s in my life. One of them was against the Green Party.
Right.
And that's my height. Yeah, the Green. It was the Green Party on an AstroTurf wicket, which had been newly laid, and the ball did not deviate.
I just feel the Green Party is just a lot of people bowling finger spin without it spinning. I don't know why I feel that's the Green Party's attack.
Well, they weren't very mobile in
that
the
case,
field.
I might have played against the Green Party as well in that case.
Yeah, they're a very, very accommodating bunch. But my highest score was 118, so I'm a bit cheesed off.
Oh, sorry about that.
You surpassed me by 5.
But yeah, I'd like to stress out. I should really stress when you say I played a lot of cricket, never to an acceptable standard. Recreational was the word on every level. But yeah, I reckon I haven't played league cricket at any level in about 8. Well, since my daughter was born. Really, my daughter's just turned 9, and I just kind of got back into it very gradually, and I thought I'll give it a crack this year. So I got back into it because previously Dan said he was into T20 cricket, you know, for his fielding and stuff. I have settled another debate, really, very clearly in my own mind, that the best format of cricket is nets, isn't it? Because
yeah,
because my return to cricket of any kind was me going down the local club and doing nets, and it was, you know, like you get 2 hours. You're back at your front door for bedtime. You've had a bit of a ball, a bit of a bat. You might have had a pint, and you know you haven't let anyone down. Maybe only yourself at the very worst. I think it's the best format. I don't know why ECB don't market it more.
You're insane. You have to keep on bending down and collect the ball out the back of the net and throw it back, and then they bowl a ball at you every 15 seconds. It's exhausting. I had a net at the start of this year, and I couldn't walk for a week.
The idea of returning to a form of cricket where if the ball hit your stumps you had to leave really offended me.
Well, yeah, you're not alone. It offended W.G. Grace and Virat Kohli. So yeah, you're in good company.
I'll take bronze on that podium.
Yeah. So you're from the north. I don't know. I don't really know where. I've never asked, but somewhere up north. You know about cricket. Then you played cricket. Your professional career though is a lot more varied than that. You covered a lot of football in your time. You covered the Olympics, Commonwealth Games. My favorite one, which you told me before, was you covered the launch of a Formula One car, which sounds riveting. A real shame I didn't miss out on that. That sounds great. But you have a proper, unlike me in Norcross, you have a proper background in journalism and coming up the right way.
It felt like the wrong way a lot of the time. I studied journalism I studied at university, and then I had 3 housemates who all had courses that one of them was a doctor, one of them was an engineer, one of them did a PGCE in teaching, and they were all staying on university for another year. And I thought, well, I'll be damned if they're staying and I'm not, so I really better find something that keeps me here. And that was journalism, seemingly. And I got into journalism via, I'd been doing music reviews for the BBC website in Yorkshire, in Sheffield, where I was studying. And that was enough to get me through the door, really, that I'd been going to write nice things about people playing at the lead mill. So I did my journalism, suddenly found out that involved going to like magistrates court and like local council meetings, things like that. That was all part of the gig. And I was made my very best impression of thinking that was, I made all the right faces when I had to do those things. And I thought, I could really do with getting some cricket if I could possibly help it. And I ended up on a work experience at the Press Association, which is the like national news agency, wire service. And that was 2006, and this is 2022, and I'm still there, and I'm covering cricket for them, which is great. But as you say, I mean, if you're going to do journalism and sport, it's really, really hard to walk into something like cricket because not many jobs, frankly. If you look around, I mean, even people who follow it quite closely on social media will know there's only a small number of people who are on that circus. Really, it's not a huge thing. It's hard to get paid easily. So I did football because that's what you do. Football's where the money and the business is. So I covered probably, 10, 12, 14, I don't know, years did Premier League football. I was pound for pound, the funnest job I ever had was being the correspondent for the Northern Ireland football team. At a time when I was the only journalist from the UK, well, only journalist from England covering, and then there was the Belfast guys who did it. But that involved at one stage, at its absolute peak of funness, I did 10 days in Uruguay and Chile, covering friendlies for Northern Ireland. So that was good fun. And with a very, very heavy heart, I traded it in for the England number 2 job, which involved sweaty mixed zones and trying to get a quote out of Ben Chilwell with another 100 people. And it was, it started off fairly rubbish with that 2016 when England got beaten by Iceland, if any of your fans are following that. But then I got on the Southgate era and I went all the way through to the 2018 World Cup in Russia. And then I hopped aboard cricket because that seat became available.
I mean, that's the thing you're talking about. There was basically one person in front of you, David Clough, who is he's very famous within English cricket media of being one of the most.
Go on,
I don't know the correct way of describing.
I'm fascinated by this. I'm fascinated to see him squirming, trying to find the bottom mo. Yeah.
Cloughie is one of the most peculiar yet straightforward people you'll ever meet, and I don't know how to reconcile that in a normal human sentence. But he was a bit of a god to many of us when we were coming through, just because of how grumpy he could get at any situation, but also how much he loved the game, and hated any impediment between his hotel and the ground, which could include fans, a traffic accident, a gay pride parade, whatever that may be between the ground. He was always moaning about that for the first couple of hours. So your last 5 years now, you've been on you quite often go out to tours before any of the other English press do, and it's just you hanging out with whichever, Mark Wood, I'm assuming. I'm just picking a northerner that you would like to talk to.
Yeah, so, well, first of all, Cloughie, I'd say, he was a great man, good man, and amongst his many, many achievements, and he was a real solid person to learn from, because this job, by the way, everyone knows, and look at Meg Lanning today, has just stepped away, and it can get a bit of it's not as easy as it's following that parade around the place. There's a lot of time, it's away from home, it's in hotels. I've never known some more level than him, and he taught you the value of that. Best thing he ever did, though, was leave the England cricket coverage heading into 2019, which was really quite nice, because it meant that I got the World Cup and Headingley, and if he'd have left it 12 months later, I'd have been walking into a different world. So I thank him for that. So at PA, we kind of still have a policy whereby when England arrive, we arrive, and when England leave, we leave. That's kind of the contract that we have, because the national media, they subscribe to PA, I guess, to be there when they're not and to fill gaps, and that's the job that we do for them. So yeah, there'll be times on tours where I'll turn up just to watch their they call it, they getting the shake the flight out of their legs. I literally get a cab across town, 45 minutes, and watch them jog around the pitch, have a look at the wicket, and get in the bus and go home. So, these can be wasteful days, but often equally there can be some interesting things, and you get to sit and chat and speak to some of the guys, and then everyone else arrives and asks the important stuff. But it is valuable because cricket. I think a lot of the players even maybe found in the pandemic era was, as much as I suppose it's the old Oscar Wilde thing about there's only one thing worse than been talked about, and that's not been talked about. And maybe there's only one thing worse than people following you every move, and that's nobody following you every move.
Can I ask about that? Because I think we end up having very different relationships with the players, broadcasters and journalists, because you're sort of around them, as you just pointed out, like right from the start of a tour. You sort of just end up being naturally affable. Whereas broadcasters, I think, especially on the radio, we kind of try to pretend that we're completely independent from it. Well, not pretend. I mean, we are independent from it. So the more we know about people, the more difficult it is in the moment. If somebody you really, really like gets out to a harebrained shot, you find yourself in danger of making excuses for it rather than just seeing it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think we sometimes actively try not to have a relationship with players, whereas I think you guys probably do the exact opposite, don't you?
I suppose to some extent, there's I'm sure there's none of them who would say they've veered too close to having a close relationship with me, but it's not hard to tell the story. If a guy hits one up in the air first ball, that's what they've done. It's not a controversial thing to point that out to them. They might, whether they like to see it or whether they like to see the TV shot of it, hear the commentary of it, see the photograph of it, or read the paragraph about it. The thing that's going to rile them most is that they got out for naught. It's not what we say about it. So,
yes,
I don't find it.
But if your voice is in the background going, "Oh, what a terrible shot that is!" I tell you, you get some filthy looks from the mothers of the players, let alone the actual players.
So, Rory, you as an agency writer, I mean, Dan's talked about having to be quite neutral, but it's still basically broadcasting for an English audience at a certain point. Agency copy is the most neutral, right? It's like the uber neutral thing. I know you as a man of many opinions.
Yeah.
I would say that, I love that Dan's laugh on that.
Yeah.
I would say that you're not known in the public as a man of many opinions. You're probably known in the public as the person who writes about, well, as you said before, the first training session as, how does Mark Wood look getting off the bus? And all those sorts
Dashing.
of things and covering press conferences. Yeah, always dashing. For you, this is quite a new thing. I feel like I've always wanted to see Rory Dollard uncut. And I feel like this is the perfect place to see that.
Well, yeah, this is where we find out whether, I can actually play the instrument or whether it's all just studio trickery. I think the idea that agency style is completely without opinion is not entirely true. It's just about how you present the opinion, I think. You for a start, you often lead the press conference and you push the direction of travel on what's been discussed sometimes. So there is sort of narrative in there and an opinion in there. So it's not as though you just sort of regurgitating a scorecard. That'd be sort of a mistake. But there are a few extra opinions on that, and we don't, what we don't do is generally publish the sort of big opinion piece of this guy's got to go. It's the heads must roll, that kind of thing. So there is, but you do, you have opinions on these things, of course you do. So we'll see what kind of issues come up, but I think it would be slightly maniacal to spend 250 days a year or whatever it is watching a cricket team and someone says, "Oh, what do you think about that?" And you go, "I haven't really thought about it, to be honest." That's you do tend to think about it, and you do tend to have an idea of how you'd like to see it go. In fact, the only person who's ever spent 250 days with a cricket team and has responded with "haven't really thought about it" to most questions about that cricket team is Trevor Bayliss, who to whom that was his stock response to almost anything. But it worked all right for him.
So I'm going to really enjoy this because I'm really going to enjoy this because I can see how this is going to play out. Essentially, my role as a ball-by-baller is not really to have too many opinions. I have the opinion, and then I ask a leading question of the summariser who's next to me, be it, Tuffers or Finney or whoever. So essentially, I'm going to get to do this, but Dolly is now going to become a summariser, isn't he? He's going to become the opinionated summariser on this podcast, and I'm going to send him a series of leading questions and see how quickly he combusts.
I'll tell you what though, what I would say, I'm not into the culture wars of cricket. I don't. That's their direction of travel, isn't it? That we're heading in, and it's you're X or you're Y. You've got to be this or you've got to be that. As you kind of alluded to, I get my culture war hits elsewhere. I love a bit of culture war, nothing wrong with that. But I just get my fill elsewhere. Cricket, I'm generally pro cricket, so I like to see the good in it where I can. But there are times where it's in short supply.
Some of these podcasts that we've been starting, like the West Indies, there isn't a huge, cricket press contingent in the West Indies, as we know. Quite often, the team tours without anyone going with them, any writers and maybe one or two broadcasters. England's obviously not like that. You often go on your own, Rory, but then people like me and Dan turn up later on, and there's a million newspapers and a couple of magazines as well. So there's a big part of it. I remember talking to Lawrence Booth a while back, and we said that the majority of English cricket media was probably more news. Who's going to get dropped next? A big reaction to the last game. Something that we're looking a bit more at in this sort of podcast, Rory, is the sort of more the analysis. And that's the thing I suppose you haven't had as much time to be able to do at PA. But I know that you have a lot of, analysis views and all that sort of stuff. Is that something you're looking forward to? Like, looking at the game in a slightly different way than you might for PA?
Yeah, sure. It's good, and it probably feeds back in both directions. I think whenever you're expanding how you're doing stuff, it can help how you're doing the other things, and maybe it will make me think in a different way. And there's, as you said, there is plenty. There is the nature of the English media is it's healthy, isn't it? It's the way that cricket is covered is. I'm sure some people have disagreements about certain things that they see or feel, but it is being covered. And what you have said there is correct, is that sometimes it is quite depressing when you turn up and you find that the world test champions come over and don't have anyone, or they might have one person. And you look, and whatever you do think about the British media and how they cover stuff, is we are doing it, and newspapers are investing in what is quite an expensive gig, sending people to Australia and New Zealand and the West Indies, and so yeah, there's a lot of knowledge out there, and cricket benefits from having a lot of knowledgeable people on the circuit who you can tap up and they can fill in the blanks, and that's something I like to take advantage of. People can explain the murky stuff that I can see but I can't explain and understand. So there's some of those people to help me out as well.
And Dan, I think both of us know, as people who've tried to start businesses and get podcasts off the ground and all that sort of stuff. I remember having a meeting when we were doing Death of a Gentleman, and we're in Soho, and until there was like the lack of interest in a cricket documentary as we walked into the room was, I think, just everyone left the board table before we even got there. And you've had the same sort of thing, trying to get up sponsors and all that sort of thing. Cricket's in this weird spot in England at the moment where you could still make a very good argument it's the second biggest sport, even if it is massively dwarfed by football. But there is a bit of a cultural cringe around cricket, which is, I suppose now even playing out within cricket with the 100 and everything. It's a really interesting time for English cricket. You've got what's been happening with Ebony's group, and you've now got the Asian group coming through, with minorities. You've got everything that's happened with the ECB and the big money that was paid to the board members there. And then, of course, the 100. It just feels like a really interesting time for English cricket, which perhaps, for people like me and Rory and you who've covered it a little bit longer, this is far more interesting than it maybe was 7 or 8 years ago.
Well, it is, because actually there's a very belated realization that it was inert and rotten, was English cricket. It was sort of, I'm reading a very interesting book on it, actually, at the moment, a sort of academic text on where cricket sits socioeconomically and culturally within Britain and England. Because don't forget, it's the England and Wales Cricket Board, and Scotland also plays, and Ireland plays. Northern Ireland plays as part of a full Irish team. So it's not like football. There isn't a monoculture, really. There's a whole series of different cultures, and a whole bunch of them have been left to wither or have been ignored, mostly in the Afro-Caribbean community and in the South Asian community. Those people have not been allowed in, and cricket has got increasingly middle class and upper middle class and reliant on public schools. When I first started watching the England team, on the radio was Fred Truman, and players in that England team came from state schools and were working class men. Not all of them by any stretch of imagination, but a lot of them were. And the game looked a lot more like it resembled England. In the 1990s, you had, Gladstone Small, Phil de Freitas, Devon Malcolm, Chris Lewis. There were just so many more people, more diverse groups being represented in the England team. And that has narrowed and narrowed and narrowed. And then, there are little pockets of difference, Moeen Ali and Adil Rashid coming along. But essentially, it's still a white public school game, and that is changing before our very eyes. Now, the way that the English cricket authorities try to change that is sometimes ham-fisted. I mean, the 100, in essence, is a reaction to the fact that the game had been dwindling behind a paywall, and they suddenly realised they needed people to come. And so now they produce a tournament where the commentators are expected to scream, "Look, a child! A child! Go and talk to the child! See, we could have children come to cricket." Yeah, and it's slightly irritating, I have to say. This isn't a gripe about the 100, I hasten to add. It's a gripe about, what the purpose of it is and why it's there. But you're absolutely right. Ebony's ACE program is really important. The South Asian engagement program as well is really important. But it'll take years for that to filter through into people who are playing it. It might take less time to engage those people into coming to watch cricket. And that's what I'm really on the lookout for. It's like training doctors when the government says, we're going to train up loads of doctors. Well, whoopee-doo. That's going to take 9 years before any of them's treating anybody. Similarly, it's going to take years and years before any of these people who are involved in engagement programs are playing cricket regularly. But their parents might go, their brothers and sisters might go, they might start engaging with the game that they're watching. And that, I think, will make for a more diverse fan group. I think English cricket fandom has been a bit, I say polarised. It's been a bit monocultural, hasn't it? You've got Barmy Army following England, and you've got county fans following county cricket. And I'm not disparaging either group, but they represent quite a narrow vertical of people. And that's where English cricket is so very different from, say, Indian cricket and Australian cricket, and indeed West Indian cricket, where they represent such a wider group of society, such a more diverse group of society. Mostly, I'm talking about class here as much as anything else. And in England, those classes are not represented. So it's really lovely that we got Dolly on so that he can represent the entirety of the working class, and I can exist as continuity.
I was waiting the whole time for that to be a Dolly joke, and you got so serious. I was like, he's not even going to make it. He's forgotten to insult Dolly all the way through here.
He's got all set up, no punchline.
No, that was perfect. That's a perfect way to go. Look, I can't wait. As I said, you're two of the most disagreeable people I've ever met, but also two of the most, certainly two of my closest friends within the English cricket media. I love you both dearly. And so really what I want to do is see you two ruin your relationship with each other by coming on a podcast and argue as often as possible. But from 99.94, it's huge to be able to get you two. I know how talented both of you are. Dan, because you tell me. Rory, because I've seen you do the work. And I cannot wait to get you on. But thank you so much for joining up. And, I look forward to the many, many arguments, both on and off air, that you both continue to have.
It's going to be fun. I can't wait.
Nice one. I don't look forward to it.
Very good.
If you want to find England on 99.94, it is in your podcast streams. So Google that. It'll also be on the YouTube channel. And Rory and Dan, you can follow them on Twitter as well. And they will tweet it out, or you follow our Twitter, or you can go on our app. The 99.94 app will also have it. There's lots of places for these two great men that you can follow. Thanks for listening.